Myra Bennett stood outside Juniper Table at 5:42 in the morning under a thin Portland rain, the kind of rain that was not heavy enough to make people run, but persistent enough to make everything in the world look as if it were losing color. The wooden sign still hung above the doorframe, the words Juniper Table carved by hand, one corner lightly cracked from the wind the night before, and on the glass door was a white notice, "Closed until further notice." The paper was taped crookedly, all four corners uneven because Myra had put it up with shaking hands after the Reserve Act. Iron system was locked, after Graham Pike sent an email saying that if the overdue rent was not paid by the end of the week, he would begin the process of reclaiming the space, after the bank called for the third time in 2 days to remind her about the equipment loan that carried her personal guarantee. Inside the restaurant, the chairs had been turned upside down on the tables. A cleaning rag had fallen to the floor beside the bar. The dried wine stain from the final night still clung in a dark purple line beneath the table by the window, and the espresso machine sat silent in the dark like an animal that had breathed too much and fine. Lie died. Mara stood outside the door, her coat damp at the shoulders, her hair stuck to both sides of her face, holding the 3 envelopes she had pulled from the mailbox. The overdue rent notice, the letter about repossessing the kitchen equipment, and a bank letter with the words personal guarantee sitting near the top like a sentence writ in office language. Tessa was not there. Her final text still sat on Myra's phone, sent at 1:13 in the morning, a single short line. "I can't go down with this, Myra. I'm sorry." Myra had read it so many times that the words no longer looked like words. They looked like tiny shards of glass under her tongue. "I can't go down with this. Not we, not our restaurant, not I'll come." Just that she could not sink with this. And Myra had been sinking for a long time. It was only this morning that the water had risen high enough for her to see her own reflection in the glass door. Warped, pale, older than 35, standing in front of what had once been the simplest dream of her life, and had now become a room locked from the outside by her own signature. Before Tessa Langley turned it into a stage, Myra's dream had been small. It did not have champagne, investors in gray suits, a local article calling her a women-owned culinary voice, a backdrop or captions about community and seasonal intimacy. Myra's dream lived inside a moss-green cloth-bound notebook she had carried for nearly 10 years, its edges frayed, a few pages stained with coffee, filled with notes too practical to be called poetry, yet more beautiful to her than any manifesto. Roasted tomato soup with garlic butter toast. Old wooden tables, no need to match. Low W. Arm lights, no harsh white. Free tea for staff after closing. Window table for solo diners. Don't sell any dish the staff can't explain in 2 sentences. Myra had once worked as an operations manager for a local cafe chain in Portland, and if anyone asked what she did for a living, she usually smiled and said, "I make the ugly parts keep running." She knew how to open at 5 in the morning before the kitchen lights were even on, how to check every crate of milk, every bag of coffee beans, every bundle of napkins. She knew how to read the face of an employee who was about to quit before they sent the text, how to stand between an angry customer and a new server on the edge of tears, how to call a repairman for a broken air conditioner while wiping up water from beneath an ice machine herself, how to recalculate food cost at 1 in the morning because butter had gone up, and one popular toast was quietly eating away at profit every day. She did not hate that work. On the contrary, some part of Myra loved that invisible labor, loved the feeling that if she arrived early enough, if she noticed enough, if she remembered enough small details, a place could open on time and make other people feel that life was still dependable. But she also dreamed of a place that did not belong to someone else, a place where when she stood in the kitchen late at night, light spilling over wooden tables, the smell of toasted bread and hot soup thick in the air, she could say, "This is mine, not because it is grand, but because it is real." Tessa had entered Myra's life long before Juniper Table, back when they both worked at an old restaurant near the Pearl District. Back then, Tessa stood at the host's stand, her hair always neatly tied back, her lips always carrying a little color, with the ability to turn a mistaken reservation into an experience that felt like special treatment. She remembered customers' names with alarming speed, remembered who was allergic to nuts, who liked the window table, who had just gone through a breakup and needed someone to compliment her new coat. Myra was in the back then, writing schedules, managing inventory, walking in and out with a clipboard, while Tessa stayed in front, smiling, lightly touching a guest's hand, softening the air in the room like butter melting in a hot pan. They became friends in a way that felt natural. Tessa brought Myra water when she worked overtime. Myra fixed Tessa's personal budget after she overspent again. Tessa dragged Mara out for one drink after a shift. Mara drove Tessa home when she cried over a man who promised too much and disappeared. Tessa always called Mara the only person who doesn't make me feel like I'm too much. And Mara, who was rarely needed by anyone in a way that felt tender, kept that sentence inside her like a secret certificate. Years later, when they met again in a coffee shop on a rainy day, Tessa had become a freelance marketer for small restaurants, always speaking about branding as if she were talking about destiny, always carrying a new story, a new idea, a new contact who could open doors. Mara brought out the cloth-bound notebook after Tessa asked, "Do why? Oh, still dream about that little place of yours?" Mara had meant to show only a few pages, but Tessa read it like a sacred manuscript. She touched the lined window table and almost cried. "Mara," she said, her voice low and beautiful, "this isn't just a restaurant. This is a place where people will feel like they've come home." Mara had heard plenty of people talk about revenue, market, food cost, traffic, lease terms, but no one had ever spoken about her dream as if it had a soul. She did not know that this was the first hook. She only knew that after that sentence, the old notebook on the table looked a little less lonely. Tessa did not pressure Mara into opening a restaurant right away. She was better than that. She let the idea stand between them like a candle, occasionally breathing it brighter with just enough warmth. "You have operations, I have marketing. You know how to keep a place alive, I know how to make people want to walk in. Two women building a table for the community, don't you see how powerful that is?" Mara hesitated because she knew how brutal the restaurant business could be. She had watched smart people lose money because of a winter that lasted too long. A landlord raising rent, a chef walking out, one bad review at the wrong time. She knew a dream could die from $12 lost every day on a popular dish. Tessa did not say, "Don't be afraid." She said something more dangerous. "If I do this with anyone else, I'll always be afraid they won't understand the heart of it. You're the only person I trust to do this with me." Mara heard, "the only person I trust," as a form of recognition she had lacked all her life. She was not good at standing in the middle of a room and telling a story. No one filmed her while she checked inventory. No one wrote captions about her when she fixed employee schedules at midnight. She was the person people needed when things broke, but rarely the person chosen before anything had gone wrong. Tessa made her feel, for the first time, that she was not just the one cleaning up after someone else's dream, but the one invited in while the dream was still whole. So they began looking for a space. They began talking about names. Tessa suggested many soft, brandable names, but Mara was the one who murmured, "Juniper Table," when she saw a small juniper bush leaning by the curb near an empty space that had once been a sandwich shop. Tessa seized on it at once. "Juniper Table," she repeated, her eyes lighting up. "The smell of woods, of home, of something that survives winter." Mara laughed. When Tessa said it, even a little roadside shrub sounded like fate. The space was not beautiful at first. The floor was sticky with old grease. The walls held the stale smell of fried food. The back counter was cracked along one edge. The ventilation system sounded like an old man's lungs. The restroom needed repair. The storage door jammed, and there was a water stain on the ceiling shaped like the map of a small, failed country. Mara walked in and immediately saw the list of work to be done. Call the electrician, check permits, measure the kitchen, calculate the maximum number of tables without violating exit paths, ask the landlord about plumbing, check the rent, read the renewal clause. Tessa walked in and saw the way the light fell through the glass at 4 in the afternoon, took a photo of dust floating in the air, and posted it to her story. "Some dreams smell like dust before they smell like bread." Mara saw the story while kneeling beneath the sink to inspect the pipes, sweat clinging to the back of her neck. And SM aisled. Back then, the mismatch still looked like balance. Mara built the reality. Tessa built the image. Mara called contractors. Tessa met food bloggers. Mara built the cost sheet. Tessa chose the color palette. Mara negotiated with Graham Pike, the landlord, a cold man with a neat mustache and eyes that only brightened when talking about rent paid on time. Tessa spoke to him about community, neighborhood warmth, and a women-owned business. Graham listened politely, then turned to Mara and asked, "Who will be responsible for daily operations?" Mara answered. He nodded. From that moment on, even though the lease carried both names, the landlord's eyes had placed the weight on one person. When they discussed the lease and the equipment loan, Graham required a personal guarantee because the business had no history. Tessa sighed and said her credit had been affected by a few delayed freelance payments, because a creative life was not always as clean as a spreadsheet. Then she held Mara's hand under the table, her fingers warm, her voice soft. "You're the real operator. People trust you more. I'm just the one selling the story." Mara heard it as respect. She did not hear the other part. The real operator is also the one they call when things are not operating. The one trusted more is also the one they come after first. She signed the lease, signed for the industrial dishwasher, signed for the oven, signed for the walk-in cooler. The pen in her hand felt light then, the ink moving smoothly across the paper. Tessa squeezing her hand after every signature as if the two of them had just crossed through a sacred rite. Months later, when the bank read those clauses back to her, that pen would become an anchor tied around her ankle. The months of preparing Juniper Table carried the kind of romance that only exists when people are too exhausted to see clearly that they are being used. Mara painted walls until her shoulders ached, tested soup recipes in a temporary kitchen, recorded every variation of roasted tomatoes, onions, smoked paprika, cream, and stock, and made Eli Grant taste it until the 9th round, when he grumbled that if he had one more spoonful of soup, he would start dreaming of tomatoes suing. Eli was the first chef, blunt, hot-tempered, someone who had once lost a food truck because he chose the wrong partner and the wrong location. So when he agreed to join Juniper Table, Myra took it as a good sign. Nina Alvarez, a server and shift lead, young but sharp-eyed, was hired after an interview in which she did not talk much about passion for hospitality, but instead asked, very practically, "How is the tip pool divided, and who handles it when a customer is drunk?" Mara liked her immediately. Denise Warren was hired part-time as the bookkeeper because she had kept books for many small restaurants, with a voice as dry as over-toasted bread and eyes that missed no invoice. All of those people looked to Myra when they had real questions. Tessa appeared with dried flowers, mood boards, logo samples, media lists, and stories about a farm-to-table dream, women supporting women. A neighborhood table built by friendship. Some days she disappeared when the electrician needed confirmation about rewiring, then reappeared 2 hours later with a bouquet of wildflowers and a content creator who wanted to film behind the dream. When Mara pointed out that the decorating bill had already run 3 times over budget, Tessa wrapped an arm around her shoulders and smiled as if soothing someone who had forgotten magic. You can't open a place with no soul just because you're afraid of money. People don't come back for a cost sheet, Myra. They come back for a feeling. Mara wanted to say feelings had to be paid for too, but she looked at the room slowly taking shape. The cream walls, the warm lights, the old wooden tables found at a salvage market, the smell of test bread drifting through the air and swallowed. She told herself everyone had a role. She told herself Tessa saw what she did not. She told herself a restaurant needed both bones and skin. She did not realize Tessa was learning how to let the skin be praised, while the bones absorbed the fracture. Opening night at Juniper Table was brighter than Mara had ever dared to imagine. Outside it rained, but inside, the yellow lights made the glass glow like a window in a painting. Bread came out of the oven, roasted tomato soup was ladled into white bowls. Glasses touched, people laughed, chairs scraped, and the smell of butter, wine, clean wood, and perfume mingled into something alive. Tessa wore a spotless cream apron and stood near the bar talking to a local reporter, one hand resting on her chest as she described 2 friends building a dream from nothing. Mara was in the back, her hands wet with dishwater, hair falling loose from her bun, apologizing to one table because food was late, bending to pick up a fallen tea. Ole running into the kitchen to ask Eli how many bowls of soup they had left. When the article came out the next morning, the main photo was Tessa standing alone beside the bar, the lighting perfect, dried flowers behind her, her smile at the right angle. Mara appeared blurred in the background, carrying a tray of dirty dishes, her face turned sideways, impossible to identify unless someone read the tiny caption at the end. Co-owner Mara Bennett manages operations. Tessa called as soon as Mara was reading it, her voice sweetly guilty. I swear they chose the photo themselves. I'm annoyed too, but they wrote so well about us, right? We need momentum. Myra looked at opening night revenue, higher than expected, and told herself the photo did not matter. New customers mattered, the restaurant staying alive mattered, but a tiny sting settled in her chest. Not because she wanted to be famous, because the place where she worked the hardest had already begun telling a story in which she stood in the background. The first few weeks were crowded with curiosity. People came because of the article, because of Tessa's Instagram, because of photos of bread under beautiful light, because of the story of 2 women opening a restaurant in a rainy neighborhood. Tessa moved from table to table, saying guests' names, asking whether they felt like they were eating in a friend's kitchen, and people loved her. Mara loved the result. She truly did. She was not jealous of her friend's light. She saw Tessa make customers smile, saw revenue rise, saw the window table reserved in advance, and thought maybe this was why she needed Tessa. But after that first wave of curiosity, traffic slowed. Portland had too many beautiful places to try once and forget. Ingredient costs rose. Butter rose. Eggs rose. One bread supplier changed its delivery policy. The ventilation system broke again. The new cooler made a strange sound every night, like an old person groaning inside the wall. New staff were still shaky. Food came out late. Eli was irritated because the menu was too broad, and Nina had to apologize to customers too often. Mara recalculated food cost and realized some of the best-selling dishes were not making enough profit because Tessa wanted the prices to feel accessible and maintain the community image. When Mara suggested reducing the menu, Tessa placed her hand on it as if shielding a child. If we take dishes away, we lose abundance. People come for the feeling of being able to choose. When Mara said they needed to cut the PR budget, Tessa said, "Cutting visibility right now is suicide. You're looking at this month, I'm looking at next year." Every conversation ended with Mara feeling small-minded, as if she only knew money while Tessa was protecting the dream. So Mara did what she always did when caught between reality and feeling. She worked more. She came earlier, stayed later, washed glasses herself when they were short-staffed, took blame when customers complained, called suppliers to ask for extensions, adjusted schedules to cut hours without hurting staff too badly. Tessa appeared at events, clothes clean, hair beautiful, speaking about the hard season of small business with a resilient smile. Mara slept on the office chair behind the counter on nights when she was too tired to go home, ate leftovers standing by the sink, and missed her nephew Milo's birthday because 2 people called out before dinner service. Lee texted, "Are you alive?" Mara answered with a heart emoji at 2 in the morning. She told herself the first season was always hard. She did not realize she was being turned into the wall that absorbed everything Tessa did not want to touch. Eli was the first to say out loud what everyone felt, and Mara did not dare name. After one chaotic dinner service, when a table of 6 demanded a refund because they had waited too long, when the cooler was making that noise again, when Tessa left early to drop by an important networking thing, Eli pulled Mara into the back kitchen, where heat still clung to the tile and the smell of burnt oil hung in the air like an accusation. "You're running Juniper Table," he said, yanking the towel from his shoulder and throwing it onto the stainless steel table. "Tessa is running Tessa Langley." Mara was so tired that the sentence made her angry immediately, because being angry at Eli was easier than being angry at Tessa. "You don't understand our relationship," Eli laughed dryly. "I understand the kitchen is out of onions, while Instagram has new flowers. I understand you apologize to customers, while she stands under lights talking about resilience. I understand today she asked the kitchen to prep free food for a private tasting that wasn't on the schedule, had no invoice, had no revenue, but did have a photographer. I understand enough." Mara said it was PR. Eli looked at her like he was watching someone try to bandage a wound with a paper napkin. "PR for the restaurant or for her?" She could not answer. That night she asked Tessa. Tessa smiled wearily, wrapping her hand around Mara's elbow in the little office. "Eli is a chef. He thinks in scarcity. I think in opportunity. If we want to survive, we have to be seen." Mara looked at Tessa's hand on her arm and remembered the day Tessa read the notebook and said this place would make people feel like they were coming home. "I just need to know those events are planned clearly," Mara said. "I can't keep finding out afterward." Tessa let go of her eyes wounded as if she had been accused. "You say that like I'm hiding things from you. Are you?" A very brief silence. Tessa looked down, then said, "I'm trying not to add more worry onto you." Once again, the lack of transparency was packaged as care. Mara wanted to believe her, because if she did not, she would have to look back at everything from the beginning. Denise Warren did not simply hand Mara a reconciliation sheet with a few strange numbers, and then disappear like a kind side character in the story. She came back to Juniper Table the next morning before the restaurant opened, when Mara was sitting alone in the back office with a sweater over her uniform, a cold cup of coffee in front of her, and a stack of supplier invoices arranged by highlighter color in a system only she understood. Denise knocked twice with her knuckles and walked in without waiting for Mara to invite her, placed a thick folder on the desk, then pulled out a chair and sat down, her slow movements carrying a calm that frightened Mara more than panic would have. "I don't want to talk about this out front," Denise said, "because if Tessa walks in and hears half a sentence, she'll turn that half sentence into another story before we've even finished adding the numbers." Mara looked up, her throat dry, wanting by old instinct to object that Tessa was not like that. But the objection no longer had enough strength to make it out of her mouth. Denise opened the folder and pushed a bank statement toward her. These are the restaurant expenses for the last 6 weeks. These are reasonable expenses. Ingredients, wages, insurance, equipment, repairs, permit fees, utilities. And these are the expenses labeled marketing, brand development, strategic outreach, private community dinner, founder narrative consultation, event styling. They sound lovely, but money is still money. She took a red pen and underlined each line. There was a private photography expense on a day the restaurant had no event, but that same day Tessa's personal Instagram had posted a new set of photos with a caption about building the future of hospitality. There was a purchase of dried flowers and high-end linen napkins for a brand dinner. But there was no booking, no revenue, no guest record. There was a payment to a pitch deck designer, even though Juniper Table had never agreed to prepare a new funding deck. There was a small legal consulting fee under the name of a firm Denise had traced to LLC formation. Myra looked at the lines and at first still tried to find explanations, because people do not stop loving a friend because of a spreadsheet. Maybe Tessa thinks these are for expansion, she said, hearing how weak her own voice sounded and feeling ashamed of it. Denise took off her glasses and set them on the paper. Mara, expansion is when the foundation hasn't collapsed. This is someone taking the windows out to sell while you're in the basement bailing water. The sentence made Mara flush, not because she was angry at Denise, but because the image was too accurate. Denise continued, her voice lower. I also found cash withdrawals from the business card before 3 of Tessa's networking events. Not big enough to trigger the bank automatically, but consistent, and the wine inventory doesn't match the POS. Nina said she saw Tessa take a few cases for private events, but didn't dare record them because Tessa told her it was PR. Mara closed her eyes. She could hear the restaurant beginning to wake up outside. Chairs scraping, Nina talking to a new server, Eli opening the cooler, knives touching cutting board. Everything was still operating, but underneath it ran a crack through the floor. What do I do? She asked. Denise looked at her, this time with gentler eyes, though not softer ones. You ask in writing. You request receipts. You stop letting important things be explained with a hug in the kitchen. And if she says you don't trust her, you remember that trust is not letting someone spend your money and then call you negative when you ask for the invoice. Mara picked up the pen, but her hand trembled. Outside, Tessa had just come in through the front door, her voice bright as she greeted the staff, the smell of perfume and rain following her into the restaurant. Mara looked at Denise. Denise only gave a slight shake of her head, as if she knew a storm had just walked in wearing a beautiful smile. Tessa did not wait for Mara to ask in private. She came into the office after Denise left, holding 2 coffees from the place across the street. Her smile gentle, her eyes faintly worried, like a perceptive friend sensing something was wrong. I brought you an oat latte, she said, setting the cup beside the reconciliation sheets Mara had not managed to turn over in time. You were sitting with Denise again? Tessa's voice was not accusing, only threaded with a thin sadness that immediately made Mara feel as if she had done something behind her back. She's helping reconcile expenses, Mara replied. Tessa looked at the papers, then at Mara, not touching anything but standing close enough to make the air feel crowded. You know Denise is great with numbers, but she also has a tendency to look at everything as a violation before she looks at it as an investment. She worked for a bunch of failed restaurants, right? Sometimes people who have been burned smell smoke even when someone is just baking bread. Myra heard the move and recognized what Tessa always did. She did not deny the numbers. She made the person carrying the numbers look wounded, old, and unable to believe. There's something connected to another LLC, Mara said, trying to keep her voice steady. What is Langley Hospitality Collective? Tessa barely blinked. She only exhaled and placed a hand on the edge of the desk. A legal container, a reserved name. You know I do branding. If Juniper Table eventually has catering, retail, workshops, we'll need a more flexible structure. I didn't want to dump more paperwork on you when you were already overloaded. Then why use the Juniper business card? Because it's connected to Juniper. Why didn't you tell me? Tessa looked at her for a long time, then her eyes grew slightly wet. Because every time I talk about the future, you hand me a cost sheet. I love you, Myra, but sometimes you make this dream smaller with your fear. It was a beautiful blow, because it did not say Myra was wrong about any number. It said Myra was wrong in spirit. Tessa picked up the coffee and pushed it toward her. I'm not someone stealing money and running away. I'm trying to give this place a chance to live beyond one season. If you want me to ask permission for every flower, every dinner, every relationship, then you don't need a partner. You need an employee. Myra looked at the coffee cup and saw her name written wrong on the lid as Myra. A tiny detail, meaningless, but that morning it made her want to cry. Tessa sat across from her, softening her voice. Do you trust me? The question was unfair because it was not asking about invoices. It was asking about 10 years of friendship, about the night Tessa read the notebook and cried, about the personal guarantee, about every time Mara had told herself they balanced each other. Mara wanted to say, "I trust paperwork more than your voice right now." But she was not that woman yet. She was still someone who wanted to save the dream. So she said, "I need things to be more transparent." Tessa nodded, wiping the corner of her eye though no tear had fallen. "Okay, I'll try to help you feel safer." That sentence made Mara feel as if she had received a concession. Much later, she would understand that it had simply shifted the role. It was not that Tessa needed to be transparent. It was that Mara needed to feel safer, as if the problem lived in her nerves and not in the money leaving the account. Few days later, Tessa held a small staff meeting before dinner service. Myra did not know the subject beforehand. She thought it was a reminder about weekend service procedures. But when she walked into the dining room, she found the whole team gathered around the bar. Nina holding a notebook, Eli leaning against the kitchen door, two newer servers glancing at each other tensely. Tessa stood in the middle of the room, apron clean, hair tied low, her voice warm like someone preparing to heal a collective wound. "I know the last few weeks have been heavy," she began. "I know there have been moments when the energy in the restaurant has felt tense, and that affects everyone. Myra is carrying so much of operations, and I love her for that. But I also want the team to know that if there are times when you feel spoken to too sharply, too pressured, or unheard, you can come to me." Myra stood at the edge of the room, feeling the blood drain from her face. No one looked at her for long, and the fact that no one looked made her understand that Tessa's words had landed exactly where she wanted them to. Tessa continued, "We're building this place not just with procedures, but with safety. No one should feel like they're just a line on a schedule or a number on a cost sheet." Eli gave a short, dry laugh. Tessa turned to him, still gentle. "Eli, I know you've been under a lot of pressure in the kitchen. I want you to feel supported, too." Eli replied, "I'd rather the kitchen had enough food to cook than feel supported." The air froze. Tessa smiled sadly, a smile that made Eli look rougher than she did. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. When all we speak in is scarcity, we forget why we started." Mara wanted to step forward, wanted to say that not having food to cook was not a negative language, it was reality. But if she spoke then, she would become exactly what Tessa had just described. Tense, harsh, unsafe. So she stayed silent. Nina looked at her for 1 second, her eyes both apologetic and afraid. After the meeting, a young server went to Tessa about changing shifts, instead of asking Mara as usual. Another asked Tessa to approve time off because "I don't want to bother Mara while she's stressed." In one 15-minute meeting, Tessa had moved power with the voice of concern. Mara was still the one who had to fix schedules, pay wages, handle customers. But Tessa became the place people went for softness. Mara became the fire alarm everyone hated hearing. That night while Nina stayed late wiping the bar, she said very quietly, "I know you're not trying to scare us." Mara stood still. "But are you scared?" Nina looked down at the towel. "Not of you, of making you heavier." That hurt Mara more than if Nina had said yes, because Tessa had turned Mara into a weight other people had to walk gently around. Tessa began getting ahead of the story in every place Mara had not yet reached. With Victor HSU, the small investor who had put money in because he believed the story of two women building a table for the community. Tessa said the restaurant had a very strong concept, but operations have been a challenge. With Graham, she sent a vague email asking whether there was any way to remove myself from liability if operational control shifts fully to Mara. With Lee, Mara's sister, she sent a long message saying she was worried about Mara, that Mara was not sleeping, not eating, becoming more and more controlling, and perhaps needed to step CK for her mental health. With the staff, she said Mara was under pressure, and everyone should be understanding if her energy feels heavy. None of these statements were entirely false. Mara really was not sleeping. She really was controlling. She really was heavy. But Tessa removed the cause, like someone cutting the anchor rope, and then blaming the boat for drifting. One afternoon, Graham accidentally forwarded Mara an email chain containing Tessa's question about removing herself from legal liability. Mara read the email in the office, her hands cold, her throat tight. 3 weeks earlier, on the same day, Tessa had hugged her in the kitchen after a busy service and said, "We sink or swim together, okay?" Mara pulled Tessa into the office and showed her the email. Tessa did not panic. That calm frightened Mara. "You're reading this in the worst possible mindset," Tessa said. "I asked because I wanted to understand the legal structure. You're always saying you run operations, you want everything clear, so now I ask for clarity, and that's wrong too. You asked how to remove yourself from liability. If operational control really belongs to you, then it belongs to me because you're not here." Mara nearly shouted, then immediately saw she had stepped into the old TR. Tessa took half a step back, hurt on her face. There, this is what I mean. You can't hear me anymore. You only attack. Mara looked at her and saw something clearly for the first time. Tessa did not need to win with the truth. She only needed Mara to react strongly enough that the reaction became evidence. From that day on, Mara began printing emails, not because she had stopped loving her friend, but because love was no longer enough to keep memory intact. Lee confronted Mara on a Monday night, when the restaurant had closed early because of heavy rain and few reservations. Lee arrived without warning, wearing a hoodie under her nurse's jacket, her hair tied in a rush, her face tired from a shift but her eyes bright with anger. She came in through the back door just as Mara was sitting on the office floor, her back against the filing cabinet, one shoe off, her phone wedged between shoulder and ear as she negotiated with the produce supplier for 4 more days to pay. Lee waited until Mara hung up, then placed a takeout box on the desk. Eat, Mara sighed. Lee, I don't have the strength to fight. Good. I'll talk, you don't have to. Mara closed her eyes. Not today. Lee crouched in front of her. Exactly today. Because last week was Milo's birthday, and you sent a Lego set through an app and texted, Auntie is sorry. He asked me if Juniper Table is your baby because you take care of it more than you take care of him. Mara opened her eyes, the sentence hitting too fast. I'm trying to keep everything alive? No, you're trying to keep alive the thing that has already eaten you, just long enough for Tessa to get out the back door. Mara stood, her back hurting so sharply she had to grip the desk. You don't understand? Lee laughed, her eyes red. How many times have you said that to me? I don't understand restaurants. I don't understand friendship. I don't understand the dream. You know what I understand? I understand a person who comes here after a 12-hour shift, bringing you food, because you no longer remember you are a human being. I understand that Tessa texted me last week saying you were spiraling, and she was really worried. She said you weren't sleeping, that you were controlling everything, that you didn't trust anyone. She asked if I could encourage you to step back. Mara looked at Lee as if she had been slapped. Tessa texted you? Yes, with that damn concerned voice of hers. She's calling everyone around you to prepare testimony that you're not okay. You're the operator, the signer, the one paying wages, the one facing the landlord. But in her story, you're the one losing control. Mara, wake up. Mara wanted to say Lee was wrong, but after the staff meeting, after Denise, after Graham's email, the objection felt like a spoon trying to bail water from a sinking boat. If I stop, she said hoarsely, everyone loses their job. Lee stood. They're already losing it piece by piece. Nina is texting me to ask if you're okay, because she's afraid wages will be late. Eli looks at you like someone standing beside a pit. You're selling sleep, health, family birthdays to preserve the image of 2 women building community. Tessa has already sold that community to her next project. Mara turned her face away. I signed. I know. If it dies, the debt follows me. Lee fell silent, the anger on her face softening into something more painful. Then at least don't let it die inside her lie. Mara sat down, and for the first time in months, she let someone see her cry without turning away. Lee did not hug her right away. She sat beside her, opened the takeout box, and pushed chopsticks into Mara's hand. Eat first. Tomorrow you start keeping evidence. But tomorrow did not arrive like a clean awakening. It came in humiliations. Mara sold her old Subaru on a cold morning, when the restaurant account did not have enough to fully pay the staff, and Nina had admitted in a small voice that her rent was due in 3 days. The Subaru was not beautiful. The rear right door made a noise. The driver's seat had an old coffee stain from a morning Mara rushed to the restaurant at 5 because the electrician arrived early. But it was the last thing in her life that fully belonged to her, not in Juniper Table's name, not tied to Tessa, not mentioned by Graham or T. He banked. At the used car lot, the buyer walked around it, lightly kicked the tires, talked about mileage, scratches, how the used car market was not as hot as it had been last year, then offered almost $1,000 less than she had hoped. Mara wanted to bargain, but her phone kept buzzing in her pocket with staff texts asking about wages. She signed. When the buyer drove away, she stood in the wet parking lot, holding the confirmed transfer notice, feeling a strange emptiness. She did not cry over the car. She cried because she understood she had just sold a piece of her real life to pay for a shared dream that the other person had begun calling choices I didn't make. That afternoon, she called Nina into the office. Nina came in looking ready to apologize first, with the face of a young person who was used to thinking her financial hardship was an inconvenience to others. Mara handed her an envelope of cash and a receipt for the rest of the transfer. Your wages and the tip shortfall from last week. Nina looked at the envelope, her eyes immediately turning red. Where did you get this? I handled it. Mara, you need to pay rent. Nina held the envelope with both hands. I don't want you selling something because of me. Myra gave a tired smile. Not because of you, because I promised to pay wages correctly. Nina cried, but she did not hug her. She only said, Tessa posted a story at an event tonight. I just saw it. She's wearing something new. Myra said nothing. Some information does not need a reaction to become a cut. That night, Myra took the bus home for the first time in years. The smell of damp coats and cold metal around her. One hand gripping the pole, watching the city drift past in the rain. She thought about Tessa's Instagram line about women lifting women up, then looked at her own hands, the skin cracked at the knuckles from dishwater, and wondered why in inspirational stories, the person doing the lifting is never asked whether their back is breaking. The first true collapse came on a Friday night, when the walk-in cooler failed completely just as the restaurant was fully booked. Myra stepped into storage and smelled the sourness of dairy and meat beginning to turn. Eli stood in the middle of the cooler, his face red with anger, fists clenched. This thing has been making noise for 3 days, Myra knew. She had called the repairman. He could only come the next morning because the previous invoice had not been fully paid. One employee quit by text at 4:12. Out front, guests were beginning to arrive. Nina ran between the bar and the door, her voice still gentle but her eyes panicked. Myra called Tessa, no answer. She called again, no answer. On the third try, Tessa texted, at Women Founders Panel. Can't leave right now. You've got this, you've got this. Myra stared at the message amid the smell of spoiled ingredients. Eli swearing under his breath, customers complaining outside, and the phrase felt like a slap wrapped in pink paper. She cut 3 dishes, rewrote the menu by hand, apologized to every table, refunded several guests, stood in the heat of the kitchen until the back of her shirt was soaked, while Eli cooked like someone fighting with fire. One customer posted a 1-star review that same night, writing that the concept was charming but operations chaotic. Operation. The word returned, like Tessa's fingerprint on a complaint the customer thought was his own. The next morning, Tessa posted a photo from the panel, standing on a small stage in white, microphone in hand, captioned, "Sometimes leadership means showing up where your future is calling." Myra read the caption in the dark office, the refund list on the desk, the cooler repair invoice beside it, and for the first time she did not recognize her friend anymore. Not because Tessa was absent, because Tessa had turned absence into leadership. The bank did not care that Tessa was inspirational. The man assigned to the equipment loan was named Martin, with a voice so polite it felt emotionless, and he invited Myra to sit in a small glass room with a fake plant and a pod coffee machine. Myra brought a folder, revenue charts, a repayment proposal, emails proving Tessa was a co-founder. Anything she could imagine might make the bank understand that responsibility could not fall onto only one person. Martin listened, nodded, typed into his computer, then said the sentence Myra had been afraid of. I understand that this is an internal dispute between partners, but your personal guarantee is very clear. If the business defaults, the bank has the right to pursue the guarantor. Myra sat straighter, because if she let her back relax, she was afraid she would never stand again. She is also a founder. I'm not disputing that. She withdrew assets, transferred data, used business funds for her own LLC. Those things may matter in a civil dispute between you and Ms. Langley, but not to the bank. Martin was silent for a beat, just long enough to count as kindness. To the bank, the loan needs to be paid. Myra looked out through the glass room. A young couple was speaking to an employee at another desk. Maybe about a mortgage, the woman laughing, the man typing something into his phone. Other people's lives continued inside systems that knew how to open for them. If I can't pay, she asked. Martin explained default, collections, credit damage, the possibility of restructuring if she could make a partial payment, a temporary payment schedule, but every sentence revolved around the same axis. Her signature. Pen from Graham's office returned in Myra's mind, light as a feather when she signed, heavy as stone when read back to her. When she left the bank, she stood under the awning and called Tessa. No answer. She texted, bank says personal guarantee falls on me. I need you to meet and discuss repayment. Tessa replied 3 hours later, I can't engage while you're in this reactive state. Please communicate through proper channels. Proper channels. Myra gave one short laugh right there on the sidewalk, making a passerby look at her and walk faster. Proper channels. After Tessa had used friendship to bring her to a place where no channel protected her. Tessa withdrew not with an explosion, but with the frightening cleanliness of self-care language. After the cooler failure, after the bank call, after the next month's rent came due, and the Juniper table account was nearly empty, Myra discovered that Tessa had moved the restaurant's Instagram admin rights to her personal email, downloaded the entire VIP customer list, deleted several marketing folders from the shared drive, and changed the password on a newsletter tool Mara had never touched because Tessa always said, "Leave that part to me." Mara texted demanding a meeting with the bank and investor. Tessa answered with a long, soft, exhausted message written more like a personal statement than a note between two partners. "I need to step back for my mental health. I can't be responsible for choices I didn't make. I love you, but I won't let your fear consume me too." Mara read it in the storage room, beside the half-empty wine rack, and felt every sound in the restaurant recede. Choices I didn't make. Tessa had been there when they chose the color palette, the flowers, the PR campaign, the menu prices, the events, the pitch deck, the separate LLC. But when the invoices arrived, all of it became Mara's choices. She called, no answer. She emailed, no reply. She went to Tessa's apartment. No one opened the door. She stood in the apartment hallway, hearing a dog bark behind another door, smelling cheap floor cleaner, her phone in hand, and understood for the first time that being abandoned in business was not like being abandoned in love. In love, people can ache over a coat left in a closet. In business, the person who leaves your signature on paper, your name on a loan, employees looking at you, a landlord calling you, a bank calling you, and that same person can post about healing while you count dollars to pay wages. Eli left on an afternoon when the kitchen no longer had enough inventory to pretend. Mara suggested running a reduced menu, using what was left in storage, turning soup into the main item, cutting expensive proteins, apologizing to booked guests. Eli stood at the stainless steel table, both hands braced on the surface, a kitchen towel over his shoulder, his face no longer just angry but exhausted. "I'm not serving a menu that pretends we're a respectable restaurant when the walk-in looks like a soup kitchen," Mara said quietly. "We need to get through the weekend." "No, you need to get through the weekend because if you stop, you'll have to see that it's already dead." That made Mara flare. "You think I don't know? You think I enjoy begging suppliers day by day? You think I don't see everyone looking at me like I'm the reason they aren't being paid enough?" Eli gestured toward the dining room. "I'm looking at you like someone being buried, Mara. But I also have my name. I can't let guests eat patched-together food and remember me as the chef at the place that lied to them." "So you're leaving? I have to." His voice broke on those two words, and Mara saw immediately that he was hurting too. Eli was not Tessa. He did not leave by caption. He stood in the hot kitchen, in front of her, carrying the shame of someone abandoning a burning ship because he no longer had hands left to fight the fire. "I lost a food truck once," he said lower now. "I stayed too long because I thought loyalty was dignity. In the end, I owed money, lost friends, and lost the ability to cook without feeling sick. I'm not doing it again." Mara wanted to hate him, wanted to call him a coward, but she looked at his hands, at the little scars from knives and burns, at his sleep-red eyes, and knew he was doing what she had not yet found the courage to do. "Can you write down what you saw?" she asked, the question escaping before her pride could stop it. Eli looked at her, then nodded. "I'll write it, not to save the restaurant. It's done, so she doesn't get to call you the only reason." He untied his apron and set it on the steel table. The sound of cloth against metal was very soft, but to Mara it sounded like a door closing. After Eli left, the kitchen was so quiet she could hear the faulty air conditioner in the wall. Nina stood in the doorway, tears on her face. "Are you opening tonight?" Mara looked at the empty inventory, looked at Eli's abandoned apron. "No," she said, one simple word, arriving late, but still painful as pulling a live tooth. Juniper Table did not close with one beautiful final night. There were no loyal regulars crying outside, no gratitude post to the community. Mara simply shut off the reservation system, called each employee, and told the truth as best she could without turning every call into a funeral. Nina cried but still asked, "Can I come help clean?" Mara said she did not need to. Nina came anyway. Denise came with a box of documents. Eli did not come, but he sent a long email with the subject line, "What I saw." Lee came after her shift, brought gloves, and did not say much. They cleaned in silence, pulled menus from leather covers, removed dried flowers from vases, threw away ingredients that could no longer be used, counted remaining wine, photographed the storage room. Nina showed Mara camera footage. Several times, Tessa had taken wine, dry goods, decorative boxes, and small pieces of equipment out after closing. Denise sent documents showing that Langley Hospitality Collective had been formed before Tessa stepped back. Lee found a torn draft of a pitch deck in the office trash, the new logo still readable. Maya, an old PR contact Mara had not wanted to involve, found the pitch deck Tessa had sent to several investors. Photos of Juniper Table under beautiful lights, opening month numbers presented as proof of concept, Myra's soup recipe described as a seasonal comfort model. and one line that made Mara put her hand on the desk to keep from falling. My former operations partner lacked scalable discipline. Former operations partner lacked scalable discipline. Mara read that sentence in the empty office, where she had slept, cried, calculated every dollar, and did not feel angry at first. She only felt a blankness inside. Tessa had not only left her with debt, she was using the corpse of the restaurant to raise money for the next dream. And in that dream, Mara was not the one abandoned. She was the obstacle overcome. Graham Pike came to inventory the assets after the restaurant closed like a man walking through a cemetery who cared only about lot measurements. He was not rude. That made the scene colder. He arrived with 2 men from the equipment company and a clipboard. His coat dry, shoes clean, voice careful. Myra unlocked the door for them at 9 in the morning, after a night of less than 2 hours of sleep. They walked through the dining room, noting tables, chairs, bar, espresso machine, cooler, oven, dishwasher. Each thing was called by asset name, model, serial number, condition, not by memory. This was the window table, where an older couple had sat every Thursday during the first month. On the clipboard, it was wood table, surfaceware, resale possible. This was the oven Mara had signed a loan to buy, the oven she had touched when it arrived, afraid and joyful, as if laying a hand on the backbone of the dream. On the clipboard, it was commercial convection oven, outstanding lien. This was the industrial dishwasher she had once joked with Tessa that if the 2 of them ever broke up, she would fight for custody. On the clipboard, it was leased equipment, recovery scheduled. Graham stopped before the wall where the Juniper Table logo had been painted by hand. You'll need to return the space to a more basic condition before handover. Mara looked at him. With what money? He exhaled, not cruel, not kind. I understand the situation is difficult, but the lease has clauses, contract. Mara had heard the word so many times, it no longer felt like paper. It was a taste in her mouth, metallic and bitter. When they detached the espresso machine, a little old water spilled onto the floor. Myra reached for a towel by reflex. One of the men said, "No need," but she wiped it anyway. Not because they needed her to, because her hands did not know what else to do when something she loved was being taken apart. Graham stood by the back door before leaving and handed her a copy of the inventory list. Tessa Langley contacted me, he said. Myra looked up. When, after the pitch meeting, she said you were conducting a smear campaign, and that I should be careful about sharing email. I told her I would only provide what was in the record. Myra held the paper tighter. Tessa was still moving, even after the restaurant died. She was walking around its body to see what pieces could still be used as a shield. Myra wanted to post everything online the night she found the pitch deck. She wanted to photograph the emails, statements, camera footage, texts, wanted to write a long post beginning. My best friend did not leave me with a failed restaurant. She designed the ruins so I would be buried in them. Lee snatched the phone from her hand. No, I want you to win with records, not with an angry post she can call a meltdown. Denise agreed. Eli sent more testimony. Nina wrote a timeline of the times Tessa took items from storage and texted staff to prepare tastings without invoices. Mara met Victor HSU in a quiet tea shop, carrying a folder so heavy the strap left a red mark on her skin. Victor was defensive at first, not because he loved Tessa, but because no one likes seeing proof that they were fooled by a beautiful story. He said every startup used money somewhat messily in the beginning. Every founder told the story from the most favorable angle. Mara pushed Tessa's new pitch deck across to him and set it beside Juniper Table's expense statement. She is using the old restaurant's photos, opening numbers, investor contacts, and calling me the reason it failed to sell her new project. If you want to lose money again, that's your right, but don't call it not knowing. Victor read page after page, his face hardening as he went. When he reached the slide, former operations partner lacked scalable discipline. He looked up. Do you have Graham's email? Mara nodded. Camera, yes. Bookkeeper, yes. Victor leaned back and stayed silent for a long time. Her pitch is Thursday. Downtown hotel. I'm invited. Mara felt her heart beat so hard it hurt. I don't want to make a scene. Victor looked at her with cold practicality. She lives on scenes, so you have to bring the truth into the right scene. That did not make Mara feel strong. It made her tired down to the bone. But she understood that if she let Tessa tell it one more time, every ruin would have Mara's name on it. Tessa's pitch took place in a downtown Portland hotel, in a meeting room with gray carpet, bottled water, white flowers on the table, and a large screen glowing with the logo of Langley Hospitality Collect. Tessa wore a cream suit, her hair tied low, her makeup soft enough and resilient enough. She stood before a small group of investors, a few people from the industry, a blogger who had once praised Juniper Table, and spoke about the painful lessons learned from a first failure. Myra stood in the hallway with Victor, Denise, Nina, Eli, and Lee. She could hear Tessa's voice through the crack in the door, still beautiful, still pausing in all the right places. Sometimes a dream fails not because the dream was wrong, but because the structure around it couldn't hold growth. Myra closed her eyes. Structure, growth. She was not saying Myra. Not yet. She was letting the room understand on its own. When Tessa changed the slide to a photo of Juniper Table on opening night, everything inside Myra went cold. Tessa said, I loved that place, but love without scalable discipline becomes chaos. Victor opened the door. No loud sound, just a strip of hallway light entering the room. Tessa paused for a beat, then smiled far too quickly, as if she had rehearsed for interruption. Victor, she said, I didn't know you were bringing guests. Myra stepped in behind him, folder in hand. Tessa looked at her, and for one very brief second, the smile fell from her face. Then she recovered, her voice softening as if speaking to someone unwell. Myra, this isn't the appropriate place. Myra answered, I know. This is where you were about to sell the story with half of it missing. The room grew quiet. Tessa gave the investors a sad smile. This is what I mentioned. Some wounds from the old project are still very alive. Myra stopped looking at her. She looked at Victor. He said, I would like to hear the missing timeline before anyone in this room considers investing. One man started to object, but Denise had already stepped forward and plugged in the USB with the calm of a bookkeeper who had seen more dreams die by invoice than anyone else in the room. The screen changed. No music, no dramatic arrangement, only sequence. The personal guarantee contract bearing Myra's signature. Tessa's email to Graham asking how to remove herself from liability. Statements showing marketing expenses diverted into events with no revenue. LLC consulting fees. Storage camera footage showing Tessa taking wine and dry goods at her closing. POS reports showing inventory discrepancies. The new pitch deck using Juniper Table photos. The text, you're the only person I trust, placed beside, I can't go down with this. Tessa's text to Lee calling Myra spiraling. Nina's statement about private tastings. Eli's statement about missing inventory and uninvoiced events. Denise's reconciliation of irregular expenses. The room did not explode. It quieted layer by layer, like a long table after dinner when everyone realizes the food tastes rot. Tessa tried to cut in. Myra is choosing data to tell a revenge story. Myra turned to her. You're right. Data can tell a story. The difference is that this data has dates, times, invoices, camera footage, and signatures. Tessa looked around, searching for sympathetic eyes, searching for someone who wanted to believe her because her voice was prettier than Myra's folder. A blogger looked down at her phone. An investor removed his glasses. Victor sat still, face dark. Tessa shifted into a trembling voice, tears rising at just the right moment. I was exhausted. I was controlled. I couldn't breathe inside my own project. Eli laughed dryly from the back of the room. You made pictures. She made delivery schedules. Nina, hands shaking but voice clear, said, Tessa, you took wine from storage and told me not to record it because it was PR. I believed you, Denise added, and PR does not exempt payment. Myra did not say much. She did not need to call Tessa a monster. She simply placed Tessa's story beside the evidence, and someone who lives by narrative does not lose when they are shouted at. They lose when their story can no longer stand alone in the light. After the pitch, investors withdrew. Victor requested an audit of the old funds. The blogger who had praised Tessa took down the PR article and wrote one very short sentence about unresolved financial concerns. A few former employees spoke up. Langley Hospitality Collective lost its chance before it could open. But Tessa did not disappear. She fought back harder than Myra expected. First came a lawyer's letter to Myra's email at 7:06 in the morning, the subject line cold. Demand to cease defamatory conduct. Tessa's attorney accused Myra of spreading false information, sabotaging business opportunities, harassment, and causing emotional harm to Tessa during a period when she was receiving treatment for severe distress following a toxic business partnership. The letter demanded that Myra stop contacting investors, stop sharing documents, remove all insinuations of wrongdoing by Tessa, or face a defamation suit. Myra read the letter in her apartment, her stomach going cold as if she had been shoved back to the beginning. Myra read it over video call and cursed once, sharply. Denise said, "This is why we kept records." But records did not stop Myra's body from shaking. Soon after, Tessa emailed a few old investors, C. Singh Victor calling Myra unstable, unable to accept business failure, obsessively controlling, and attaching a few text messages cut from their contact. One message Myra had sent on the night the cooler failed read, "I can't breathe in this place anymore." Tessa used it to prove Myra hated the restaurant and was mentally unwell. Another message read, If you don't come in tonight, I will never forgive you. Tessa removed the lines before it about the kitchen collapsing, employees crying, customers demanding refunds. Former employee named Callie, who had once been corrected by Mara for repeated lateness and was later comforted by Tessa, posted a vague story saying, "Some leaders preach accountability but create fear behind closed doors." Tessa shared it and added, "Healing from emotional abuse in business partnerships is real." Mara stared at that story until her eyes hurt. Emotional abuse, mental health, healing. Tessa had taken the language of the wounded to hide the blood on her hands. She was not only denying the evidence, she was trying to turn Mara into the abuser because Mara dared bring evidence into the light. During a meeting with Victor, Mara nearly collapsed. "Maybe I should stop," she said. "I don't have the restaurant anymore. I don't have the strength." She still has people who believe her. Victor, practical and not gentle, looked at her across the table. "Some people will always believe a beautiful story over an invoice. Question is whether you let them be the only room." Ethan, the lawyer Denise introduced after the threatening letter, responded to Tessa with a short letter, attaching the timeline and evidence and warning that any defamation claim would have to face discovery. Tessa did not sue, but she did not become silent either. She kept posting things vague enough not to be pinned down, sharp enough for anyone involved to know who they were aimed at. Mara learned another thing. The truth does not make manipulative people disappear. It only forces them to change tactics. Mara's consequences lasted longer than anyone online would have the patience to follow. After Tessa's posts cooled, after the comments moved on to another drama, after investors withdrew and Juniper Table became an old name in the memory of a few people who had once eaten soup there, Mara still had to live inside the administrative wreck. She applied for an operations job at a new restaurant opening inside a small hotel, wore a carefully ironed shirt, brought a clean resume, and tried to talk about Juniper Table as a painful but useful experience. The interviewer, a male manager a few years younger than her, looked at the paper, then raised his eyes with a cautious smile. "I read a little about Juniper Table. That was pretty complicated, wasn't it?" Mara knew immediately she was not being asked about her skill. She was being asked whether she would bring trouble. She talked about systems, lessons in cost control, vendor terms, clear division of responsibility, documentation. He nodded, took notes, and a few days later sent an email saying they had chosen someone better fit for the current culture. Better fit. She read that sentence on the bus and laughed tiredly. Place once built by her labor had now become a shadow in an interview room. When her old car was gone and she needed to buy a cheap one for consulting work, the loan was denied because her credit score had been pulled down by default and debt restructuring. The bank employee said she was sorry. Perhaps Mara could try again in 6 months if her repayment record stabilized. 6 months to someone with a car is a date on a calendar. To Mara, it was 6 months of buses, rain, carrying work materials on her shoulder, being late because a route changed, coming home with aching feet. When her landlord announced a rent increase and she looked for a smaller apartment, 2 places rejected her because the credit report showed business debt. A leasing agent looked at her with professional pity and said, "It happens." Mara wanted to answer, "No, it does not just happen. It is signed, built, hidden, narrated falsely, and dropped onto someone." But she only nodded, took back her papers, and went outside to stand in the rain. There are systems that do not care you are a victim if your score has already changed color. A few months later, a new restaurant opened in the old Juniper Table space. It was called the Laurel Room. The sign was elegant, cream-colored, the glass clean, new green plants set on both sides of the door. Mara saw it one afternoon while passing by because a bus route had changed. She had not meant to stop, but her feet slowed on their own. Inside, the window table had been replaced by a small stone table, brown leather chairs, different pendant lights, a repainted bar. No one knew that place had once held a crooked notice on the door, that Nina had once cried in the storage room, that Eli had laid his apron on the stainless steel table, that Mara had once stood wiping water from the espresso machine being removed. Couples sat by the window, laughing over cocktails. A server set down a dish and leaned in to say something. New life had entered the old room without asking permission from her memory. Mara stood outside so long that a staff member inside looked out. She walked away. That night, she opened the internet and saw that Tessa still had people who believed her. Not as many as before, not as brightly as before, but still some. An article in a small newsletter called Tessa, a misunderstood founder navigating the gendered cruelty of public failure. Beneath it, a few people commented that women are too often punished for daring to have ambition. Mara read that far and turned off the screen. She no longer wanted to explain, because to explain, she would have to begin again, drag out every invoice, Every email, every sleepless night before a crowd that always preferred a beautiful story to a bank statement. The truth had been spoken in the room that mattered most. But the world was too large for every corner to hear. Operations consulting helped Mara pay down the debt slowly, but it tested her in subtle ways. A small cafe in Vancouver, opened by a young couple, hired her for 3 months to organize inventory systems and cost sheets. They were kind, exhausted, with a small child sleeping in a stroller beside the counter in the morning. Mara looked at them and saw herself in the stage before disaster had a name. She did more than the contract required. She stayed late, fixed the menu, called suppliers, taught staff how to record waste, sat with the wife until 10 at night recalculating food costs. One day, the husband pushed a stack of loan papers toward her and said the equipment supplier needed someone experienced to confirm the operations plan. Just a supporting signature, not a main guarantee. Mara picked up the pen by reflex. Her whole life had trained her to step forward when someone needed help. She looked at the young couple, at the sleeping baby, at the small cafe smelling of fresh coffee and waffles, and a part of her wanted to save them so badly it hurt. Then she saw her hand resting on the line that read, "Personal assurance of operational oversight." Not a main guarantee, but still a small door. She put the pen down. "I don't sign anything that places legal responsibility on me outside my consulting contract." The wife blushed. "We didn't mean." Mara nodded. "I know, but no." The air became uncomfortable. The husband pulled the papers back, embarrassed, disappointed. On the bus home, Mara found herself shaking. Not because they were bad people, because she had nearly repeated the old thing with people who did not have to be Tessa to be dangerous. The rescuer role was not only imposed by others. It lived in her too, waiting for a chance to be called necessary. That night she opened the cloth-bound notebook, looked at the page that said "Never sign love into debt," and wrote underneath it, "Not even kindness, not even fear, not even when they are good people, not even kindness, not even fear, not even when they are good people." When Mara returned to the old juniper table space one last time to retrieve the notebook, everything inside her had already passed through so many layers of loss that the emptiness no longer made her collapse. It only confirmed. The sign had been removed, nail marks remained on the wall, the kitchen was cold, the smell of metal and floor cleaner replacing the smell of bread. She found the cloth-bound notebook in a stuck drawer, the paper edges dusted with dried flour. First page still read, "Window table." She stood in the place that had once been the heart of her life, and understood that juniper table could not be saved by exposing Tessa, and it could not be revived because a few people believed Mara. The tables had been sold, the staff had scattered, her credit had been wounded. Lee still loved her, but there were new silences between the sisters, because Lee had watched her go too far before coming back. Nina had moved to another restaurant and still texted Mara on the day she received her first full paycheck, writing only, "I'm not scared of rent this month." Eli sent his statement and disappeared for a while, then later texted a photo of soup he had cooked in a new kitchen with no caption. Denise occasionally emailed to remind Mara not to pay debt early with living money. Graham leased the space to someone else. Victor invested elsewhere. Tessa still lived somewhere, dimmer but not extinguished, still with enough people calling her complicated, still with enough people unwilling to read the timeline. There was no complete justice, only consequences unevenly divided. Mara tore a blank page from the back of the notebook, placed it on the cold, stainless steel table, and wrote again the sentence she had put in her wallet. "Never sign love into debt." This time the handwriting was steadier. Not prettier, just steadier. She folded the page, placed it in her coat pocket, and turned off the kitchen lights. When the door closed behind her, the sound was very small in the empty space, not like an ending, but like a person accepting that some things have died and do not need to be called by a softer name. Outside, Portland was still raining, still blurring the glass, still making the lights of restaurants look warm and forgivable. Mara pulled her coat tighter and walked to the bus stop because she no longer had a car, the old notebook in her bag, the new page in her wallet, the debt on her back following her for years to come. She was no longer the woman who believed that doing the most work meant she would naturally be seen. She was no longer the woman who heard, "You're the only person I trust," and forgot to read the small print at the bottom of the contract. She did not become completely cold, either, because tomorrow morning she would still go to another small cafe, still fix the cost sheet, still help them not die from mistakes she had once failed to see. But she would not sign for them, not carry for them, not let friendship, kindness, or a beautiful story become a financial noose under her name. Tessa had left Juniper Table through the back door before the roof came down. Mara was the one buried beneath it, and though she had dug her way out, The dust remained in her lungs. From then on, every time she stepped into a new kitchen, heard knives touch cutting boards, smelled hot bread, watched yellow light fall over wooden tables, some part of her still wanted to believe again. Then she would touch the folded page in her pocket, remember the rain on the crooked notice, the bank envelope, the car she sold, Nina holding her wages with both hands, Eli laying his apron on the stainless steel table, Tessa standing in a hotel meeting room talking about rebirth in the voice of someone who had left another person in ruins, and Myra would keep walking, slower, more careful, not healed, but no longer blind.